And we are recording, so you can go ahead now.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for being here. It's always great to share. I have also noted this particular day here on the 20th of November, 2025. It's during the new moon in Scorpio. And let's take a look at deep metaphysical, spiritual dynamics from new perspectives, especially since we've got this retrograde Mercury that is conjuncting the sun. And we have the Uranus sextiling Neptune. Very auspicious, I would say, for delving into the it's going to be working okay. Yeah, so there are several zodiacs that we're working with, both from afar as well as astrological, as well as astronomical. The siderealists and the astronomers looking at the constellations are going to wait, they say, another 600 years before the Age of Aquarius begins. Meanwhile, many tropical astrologers are kind of ignoring the whole thing, just saying, well, it's going to happen maybe or maybe not, but we got this Saturn Neptune thing going on right now, and that's what's more important. So, constellations in the sky, but which ones? There are international, intercultural star patterns, and it depends upon the culture. Of course, we can go back to the ancient Egyptian, the Chaldean, which are very similar to our well-known star constellations that we know of. But the Mayans, the Aztecs, also had their own zodiacs and creatures patterned in the sky. Of course, the Chinese also, I was born in the year of the horse. I'm quite happy about that. But there are many different cultural perspectives that one can choose from. Here's the famous Aztec sun pattern, for instance, right there in Mesoamerica. A wonderful pattern there, quite complex. And they too had their own zodiac, and the zodiac means the circle of living things. And for instance, in their cosmic perspective, they have, for instance, the crocodile, the wind as a constellation, the home, the house, the deer, the water, the reed, and the jaguar, among others. Again, very kind of foreign to a lot of us, but yeah, who's to say that they are wrong and we are right here? We're calculating the age of Aquarius, and this is a brief history of cosmic time. We have, of course, these various cultures and their own collection of animals in the sky. And this means totally different mythic creatures, stories, and legends. And the stars and zodiac patterns were grouped into many creatures and myths. So we have to ask, is ours here in the West the true and correct one? We go back in our Western tradition, back to the Chaldean, Babylonian myths, which were then adopted by the Egyptians, Persians, and Hindu cultures, then the Greek and Roman, and ta-da, that's what we have today. Astronomical advancements, however, have gone on, especially in the last few hundred years, so that we know now that the Earth is not the center of the solar system. And so that is a shift, that is a change from both an astronomical and an astrological perspective. And here's the famous Tycho Brahe, who, as a good Sagittarius boy, he was looking into the sky, but this was just before the telescope made things a bit more clearer. So, as one perceives the sky, astronomers calculate that the vernal equinox, presently in the sign of Pisces, will shift into Aquarius within 600 years. And why would that be? Well, one thing is that the sidereal zodiac sign Pisces is 37 degrees wide. And I've come across some other variations of that, of other size. I guess it depends on, which star one starts with. But if we just take a look at that, and every degree is 72 years, then just those extra 7 degrees means another 500 years waiting for the age of Aquarius to begin. So that is indeed one big issue. The different constellations are different sizes, not an even 30 degrees as we tropical astrologers would use. For instance, we've got that, here's an image from a summer solstice point. The constellations today, right there, as you can see, between Taurus and Gemini. And it really looks quite perfect there. I mean, there are the horns of Taurus on one side. Then we have over on the left-hand side, we've got the Gemini twins. And so it seems to be really right there. And one would say, oh, okay, according to that, then, if that is right there in the middle, then 30 degrees back, and you see that off to the left, we have Cancer. And that, of course, is where the summer solstice point is, but of course, in our constellations in the sky, the sidereal, it seems to be, 30 degrees off. But that's only if each of them are about 30 degrees wide, which that is not true. Here is a recent article of the New York Times less than a month ago. They published this, and I've got several interesting pictures here. But taking a look at that, and I think you can see my cursor here. Is that correct? See it moving?
Yes, we see it.
Very good. So here, for instance, we see the very huge Pisces constellation in the sky, and right next to it is the rather small Aries constellation. This on the external is where the sun is according to astronomy in 2025. Here, this middle circle has got where the constellations were, again, with the signs back in 25 AD. A bit of a difference there. As the modern astronomers continue to pay attention to things, here is yet another interesting example where the sign of Aquarius from here stretching out over there kind of to the midpoint of Capricorn. So it overlaps with the star sign Capricorn. This line right here is the ecliptic, and so officially they're ignoring that part of the Aquarius constellations and focusing more upon Capricorn. But that's just yet another example that it's a very small sign. It's not even. And so that's one dynamic that we have to deal with. This is a article connected to that same New York Times piece, and I just have it here so that you can take a look at it at your own leisure, reading about it. But basically, it's the modern, astronomical, everyday academic perspective that they don't really believe in astrology. Here's page 2 of that, and again, just to have you read it at your own leisure, whenever you wish to do that. There's some good information there. But staying with our Western tradition, an amazing synchronicity occurred around 2,400 years ago. The two zodiacs, the sidereal and the tropical, coincided, and a great year began again. Hipparchus, a Greek mathematician and astronomer around 150 BC, calculated that the zodiac was a few degrees off the equinox point. A few degrees is the key phrase I'm looking at here. Maybe some of you attended years ago a few talks by David Ulansey. He was a professor at CIS, California Institute of Integral Studies, he gave a fascinating talk about this very thing when Hipparchus did his calculations, and this contributed to astronomical understanding, and it had an enormous impact on the Hellenic and Roman peoples of the times. The mystery cult of Mithras, which flourished throughout the Roman Empire, probably sprang from this revelation, according to Professor Alansi. They knew that the reigning planets, the gods and goddesses, moved in their own orbits or celestial spheres. The precessional movement indicated that the fixed stars or the whole of the heavens moved too. How great was the mover who could do that? It must be Mithras, the ancient Mesopotamian sky god. And to this deity, the cult built underground chambers that depicted the stars on the ceilings. I've seen images of them, again, underground kind of oblong sort of things with the stars painted on the ceilings. And the key phrase here is underground here in the first century, also BC, as well as for another couple hundred years. Very interesting. Here we're talking about, of course, the great ages from that wobble that can rotate very slowly backwards, taking about 26,000 years to do so. And that spin is where we get the precession of the equinoxes, slowly going back. And the images below here, we see that they calculate here that the sun was, again, right there in the constellation of Pisces here in 2025, this year. And then they calculate that it goes back to about the beginning of that constellation of Pisces. And they have concluded that was about 130 BC. And then there it is in Aries 976 BC. Why they chose 976, I do not know. But we're talking about sky markers. The constellations in earlier times were primarily used as markers to help determine star positions and what influence could be found in the sky or heavens. Constellation patterns were used to find groupings for easier identification and, of course, to locate the planets, the wandering stars. And the big point here is that astronomers cannot use the tropical zodiac to locate these celestial lights because they use space or the constellations. The tropical observers use solstices and equinoxes, a division of time marking seasons. So one of the big differences here is it is either a space or time markers. There's basically two main zodiacs, even though I've mentioned, like the Aztec and the Chinese and so forth. Here, what we typically here in the West deal with is the sidereal zodiac, which is a static system that aligns zodiac signs with the actual positions of constellations in the sky. And by the way, I think it took maybe hundreds, if not thousands of years for a basic agreement about which stars constituted those constellations in the sky. That was a development. And that system contrasts with the tropical zodiac, which is based on the seasons and does not really consider the shifting positions of the stars, for it will follow the equinoxes, etc. However, as we all know, tropical astrologers can and do take into consideration the fixed stars, but of course locate them on the shifting tropical zodiac. If only we had two different names for these two different Western zodiacs. We could differentiate the two main systems and untether ourselves. For instance, Aries in the constellations versus the Ram in our springtime in the north, autumn in the southern hemisphere. And I want to emphasize that as it is the seasons, it is indeed the equinox in our spring, but it is the autumn in the southern hemisphere. But then, as far as the name goes, it would be really great. And I remember, I think back in the 70s, maybe the 80s, they were indeed trying to encourage the tropical astrologers to just use a different name. Don't use Aries, Taurus, Gemini. Use the Ram, the Bull, the Twins, etc. I still think it's a good idea. But back to that spin, the wobble, seasons and polarities. So as we are paying more attention here in our tropical perspective to the changing equinox, solstice, and so forth, then we're having to take into consideration that 23.5 degrees slant of the Earth, which helps us to have our seasons. And yes, our summers, our winters, which the opposite can be found in the southern hemispheres, I think we're getting a little bit closer to maybe the divine influence as we're rolling around this interesting sun, our own solar system in our own backyard. So the seasons and the polarities, the north and south of the equator. So think yin yang as in Aries and Libra, or the ram and the scales. And here, this really lovely, colorful image is telling us, I believe, that maybe um, the Wicca, pagan, Celtic, Druid perspectives, another ancient way of dividing up the seasons, the sky, and the times might be something that we could perhaps look at again. And don't forget the modes, cardinal, fixed, and mutable. I think that's also very important as we pay more attention to how we can perceive our tropical zodiac in perhaps a renewed way. I believe on the left is that great ancient image of the goddess, Egyptian goddess Nut, and she's the sky goddess. And there are, again, all of the stars above our heads. And then down below is a human, and the correlation is seen above as below. And there is a Egyptian god touching the throat, which could be Taurus, and then also touching the crotch, which could be Scorpio, showing the polarities between Scorpio and Taurus, the autumn and the spring. And is that reflected upon the human body as seen on the right-hand side, where this is a classic thing used in the medieval time. This is from the 1600s with the Aries affecting the head, and Taurus around the jaws, the nose, the throat, Gemini on the arms, etc. And so maybe that might be what we could be looking for with us as humans and reflected in Nut, the sky goddess. But let's check that equinox point. And are the astronomers paying attention to it? And by that I say, oh yeah, that equinox point to us, to the tropical, maybe to the goddess Nut, that is the beginning of Aries. That is 0 degrees. And I'm wondering if that 0 degrees is going to be important, because I'm pretty sure that the astronomers don't really think too much about that, except of course, they know that we have equinoxes, but that particular degree, maybe not. This is a really interesting chart of the United States, born on the 4th of July, 1776. I've been using this particular chart for a long time. 8 degrees Scorpio rising. And just noticed a couple of interesting things there, even though my main focus or my point right now is to look at the 0 degrees Aries. So here in the third house, we have got Pluto in Capricorn in the house of siblings. And that very same Pluto in 1861 went from there up exactly over to the seventh house cusp, 8 degrees. And that's when we had our civil war with our sibling. But looking up over into the fifth house, that Neptune is right there. And interestingly enough, this was exactly when they started to open fire on Fort Sumter. And that was the 12th of April, 1861. And right there, here is Neptune, 29 degrees 56. And the very next day, Neptune was in 0 degrees Aries, and we were in a full-scale civil war at that point. Just as an aside or something really extra interesting, it's not connected necessarily to the this talk on the 0 degree point and the zodiacs, but there is that Uranus return, and Mars was right there also. And that's the famous Uranus return every 84 years. And it's coming up again in the United States chart. Oh my goodness. In the meantime, here's another interesting example of that 0 degrees Aries. And this happened not too long ago. That was the 11th of March, 2011. And that was the earthquake, the tsunami, and the nuclear explosion in Japan. And so here again, right on that very sensitive place, here you'll see Neptune at 29 degrees Aquarius, which is again very interesting right there on the cusp. But Uranus is the one to look at. Here in this particular chart, I have it set for the first nuclear explosion, which happened on March 12th. And you'll see that up there in the 8th house, which is really quite perfect, that Uranus was at 0 degrees Aries, fire sign. And then we had the nuclear meltdown in the 8th house. At that point, it then started to make a cardinal square to Pluto that you'll see there in the 5th house. In the meantime, on the 11th, one day before, Uranus was at 2959 Pisces, and there was the earthquake and the tsunami, and so the water side of the equation. And then the next day, we had the nuclear meltdown on the 12th, and that was the fire sign part. Very interesting, very exact. And as you all know, we've got Neptune and Saturn coming up to that 0 degrees Aries very soon, just like as they were this springtime. They'll be there in late January and February 2026 coming up. So yeah, that 0 degrees Aries is a thing. And it should mark the Earth's wobble navigating the great ages. So the question here then that I will ask is, when did that 0 Aries really align to the ancient or original zodiac? And I will soon point out that about 2,400 years ago, the Aries constellations sidereal and tropical lined up, and the two rams were united. So we are, of course, talking about the great ages, and the term great year refers to the time required for the equinoxes to complete one full cycle around the whole ecliptic. You saw that picture of the Earth and the very slow wobble, and it is approximately 25,920 years, approximately. And divided up to 12, that means 21, 60 years for each sign, which is the great age. And then it's very interesting to divide those into 3 decanates or 10 degrees each. And that means each of the decanates in every great sign will last about 720 years. Break that down for the next one, and 72 years for each degree. So here's a couple of different sources for the beginning of the Piscean age. And that same New York article that I presented here, they say that Hipparchus calculated the discrepancy. And the question there back then about when he figured it out, 100, like 159 BC, or was it 150 BC? They were, don't really know, but it was a few degrees off. And so I'm just going to make a guess. How about 3 degrees off? Because what earlier chart calculations was he referring to? The Chaldean, the Babylonian? I don't know. But if we just take a simple, 3 degrees from his time, that will bring us back to 376 BC. Then from an astronomical perspective, Norton's Star Atlas, under astronomical terms, they say, quote, zodiac coincided with the constellations some 2,300 years ago. And that takes us to 333 BC. And then years ago, I attended a talk with Stephen Forrest, and he was contemplating the beginning of the Piscean Age in a talk in California in 1994. He suggested taking the time of Buddha and the time of Jesus and splitting the difference. Now, that's very precise. But that takes us to 282 BC. And so, okay, here's my simple theory. What might the Age of Aquarius look like compared to the religious, intuitive Pisces age? And I say, take a look around us. Technological wonders. I mean, I'm right up here in Virginia right now. You're mostly over there in Atlanta, Georgia, and we've got a friend in California. Quite amazing. This is the technological age. Radio, TV, airplanes, Wi-Fi, spaceships, and then we have the United Nations, constitutions, human rights, which are eroding as we speak. But this is all very Aquarian. And so my sense, let's take a look when the planet Uranus, which rules Aquarius, when was that discovered? And that was in 1781. It was a Tuesday. Uranus discovered, and here is that very time, and always very cool to see that. That was up in Bath, England, by the way. I went there to check out the Herschel home and to notice, what a miracle it was that there in that section of England, he had some clear sky days in that cloudy land in order to do his calculations. But anyway, he did discovered Uranus, and there it is up into the 8th house as we recognize it. And interestingly enough, and imagine, of course, not only for the discovery of the planet Uranus, but is it kind of also telling us a bit of a forecast of things to come in, especially the beginnings of this age of Aquarius. And there it is, opposite Saturn and Mars in Sagittarius. And then squaring the sun over there in Pisces. And I always put exactly opposite the sun, the Earth. And that's found over there in Virgo. So a grand cross, one could say. But one could also say that is a double Scorpio thing with the rising sign and the moon right there in Scorpio. Yeah, one could go into, prognostications about what all that means for our times, since 1781, but we won't go there. just a few years, 2 years after the discovery of the planet Uranus, the Montgolfier brothers had a really exciting event in France, and that was the balloon, the first flight. I mean, this was only 2 years after that. And so I'm wondering here, with the fixed air Aquarius perspectives, I'm wondering, should we not call it, the water bearer, but maybe the balloon adventurer? Here we have on the bottom right, classic things connected to Uranian idealism, liberty, egalitarianism, fraternité. And, we in the United States, we had our Declaration of Independence, again, right there on both sides of that discovery time. So, and various other images, ideals, and events coinciding around there, a few years before, a few years after. Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Does that sound fixed air? That's mind design. What we also more clearly know is the Industrial Revolution, technological innovations, inventions like the steam engine, cotton gin, experiments in electricity. I mean, we are at this point, I'm saying, yeah, we have left the Pisces age behind. We had also Anton Mesmer dealing with animal magnetism and working with magnets, putting people into trances before he knew that he was hypnotizing people. 1780, the League of Armed Neutrality, created by Russia, Sweden, and Denmark to protest British seizures of neutral shipping. Again, very Aquarian. 1792, National Convention in France abolishes the French monarchy and establishes a republic. Then they also came up with their own system of sky division, by the way, because they said, let's have 10 months, not 12 months. And they named them. But they also gave us the metric system. Thank goodness for that. Another dynamic connected to this shift to a new fixed air sign is France bans Catholicism, ousting an old Pisces institution. But then they quickly had the French Reign of Terror, which is a bit of the extremism. And believe it or not, they said that the guillotine was a humane way to execute people because basically it happened very quickly. But I would point out that the will center was cut off and Uranus rules the thyroid. Another interesting dynamic, not only of that time, but in general, with Aquarius, we have the polarity of Leo, and we have the rise of Napoleon. And even in his name, Napoleon, yeah, what a classic Leo fellow. I mean, everything about him. So, okay, I'm hoping I'm making a couple of points here. So calculating the great ages. So my idea here is if indeed we have 1781 marks the beginning of the age of Aquarius, let's go back the 2160 years, and that should give us the beginning of the age of Pisces. And that takes us back to 379 BC. And that's pretty close to those other estimates that I had presented. And here is the cosmic graph. Ooh, wow. And here in the middle, you'll see the age of Pisces off to the left, the age of Aries that ended in 380 BC. Notice in the 2160 years, 2160 years of any great age, evenly divided, by the way. We've got the decanates, and I'll be paying closer attention to them as I take a look into history. Scorpio, the first 720 years, then Cancer, then most recently Pisces, and so it's like Pisces, Pisces, and now we're in the Aquarian age, and the decanate is the Libra decanate that we are in right now. So going back to the beginnings, 379 BC, the age of Pisces, with the polarity of Virgo. Now think of Pisces and Virgo, but mostly, strongly Pisces, but that polarity of Virgo is kind of in the background throughout the whole Pisces age. And then I have, as I said, divided them into those decanates, those decans. But taking a look at, from the 379, 380 BC, early there, the Romans and the Roman Empire just growing at that point. And they were famous for building aqueducts, spas, plumbing, floor heating, and road construction, polytheism, and stoicism. I mean, when I think of stoicism and the Scorpio decanate, I mean, that is such a good fit. A lot of people don't know that Stoics were very interested in astrology, and they saw the powers of the gods and things that we mere mortals could barely stand up against. But it was um, the sign of a great person who can stand up in something greater than himself and still find his center. And that is a deeper meaning of Stoicism. I mean, very early in the first degree of this age of Pisces, and this is more on the Scorpio decanate side here, is Alexander the Great. And he overwhelmed the ancient Persian Empire. And within just a few years, I think he was just maybe 13, 14 years that he was, conquering all the way to modern Pakistan. But what he really did in his legacy was he left the Hellenistic age to the whole region, which basically imported Greek culture, ideas, arts, philosophy to all those areas, those regions. And then, again, still thinking about Pisces, Scorpio, myths, gods, and temples of the East, mystical rites, priestesses, seers. Astrology, of course, was very popular, as was wine and intrigues. Carthage didn't do too well. The more that we went into the Pisces age, I believe because it was more of an Aries culture. Here, the age of Pisces, here is a particular time that I found right on that very same year, the 380 BC, the end of Aries, the beginning of Pisces, 5 planets aligned. This is really quite an interesting chart. Look at the very bottom down there in the fourth house. Jupiter, Uranus, there's the moon close by. But opposite Uranus, Jupiter is Pluto. I mean, a Pluto Uranus opposition right there. And guess what? Another Saturn Neptune conjunction. And there they are over on the left-hand side in Cancer at that point. And by the way, I used a March 1st time because according to my little theory here, that at that point, that's when the sidereal and the tropical should line up. And therefore, March 1st should be, the sun should be at 0 degrees Aries. But you can see up there in the ninth house, it is not. It's at 6 degrees Aries. So I need to contact some calculators at Solar Fire and others and say, could we kind of come up with a system to also keep that in mind? But let's move on. That same time, the mysteries, cults, and initiations were cut off. One really interesting thing that I find really quite perfect for that Pisces Scorpio decanate is the cult of Isis, a major religious movement in the ancient Egypt spread throughout the Greco-Roman world, focusing on the worship of the goddess Isis, who was associated with motherhood, magic, and the afterlife. Her cult included various rituals and festivals, and it emphasized her power to resurrect the dead and provide protection to her followers. This cult spread even to Rome, which infuriated the Greco-Roman priests and leaders. And the Romans, by the way, they had paid attention to Vesta and the Vestal Virgins, which is a very Virgo polarity thing, because they were the seers of their particular culture. The Elysian Fields, also very famous in the Greek world, also known as Elysium. It's the paradise in a Greek mythology where the souls of heroes and the virtuous go after death to enjoy eternal happiness, which is by a subsection of Hades, very underworld and eternal and beyond death, very Scorpio and Pisces. The Greco-Roman gods, who we modern astrologers acknowledge today, were front and center in this Pisces era. Temples, rituals, prayers, and offerings. And here is a great mosaic here of Neptune, the conjurer of storms, with his trident. Not to just be so Western centric, off in India and Asia, there's going to be parallels to these things, or it shouldn't really work at all. Here in India, we had the very wise Ashoka. He was a Buddhist leader, and he was really quite evident in that 3rd century. So Pisces, Scorpio. And I'm going to also include that polarity of Virgo there too. He was tolerant of many different beliefs, and we could have used more rulers like him, I'll say that. An interesting, brilliant person was Archimedes. Again, in the first couple of degrees of the age of Pisces, brilliant genius, inventor, mathematician. He was killed by the Roman soldier. And I'm thinking here Pisces Einstein with this fellow. The Greek world was continued to be drawn into these really interesting initiations and these cults. And Demeter, in her search for her daughter Persephone in the underground realm of Hades. Again, I have to think of Scorpio here. The Eleusinian initiates passed into a dark hall, the Telestorion, and were subjected to terrifying sights before entering a room brightly lit by fire, again, all underground. There, the Hierophant shouted a cryptic announcement alluding to the birth of the god Plotos, the god of wealth, and displayed objects that represented Demeter's power over fertility, such as a sheaf of wheat. From here developed the cult of Isis, also inspired by Egyptian beliefs. Her husband Osiris was torn into pieces, but was resurrected later. Here we have that Pisces Scorpio decanate, and here are some Roman lucky talismans. And I do understand that in many homes, just above their doorways, they attached these lucky charms for protection and good luck and fertility. And I don't have to say too strongly that that seems pretty Scorpio to me. Meanwhile, in Judea and Israel, Jesus of Nazareth, born of a virgin, preached of another world, condemned, crucified, and resurrected. Very Scorpio. He healed, performed miracles, Pisces, Virgo. So basically, in the West, Christianity would be the great influence for 2,000 years, basically all of the age of Pisces. And Jesus was the fisher of men. And here we have the fish symbol. And the ichthyos or fish symbol was used many times by the early Christians, especially when they were being persecuted. They also met in the catacombs underground, again, where they buried the dead, very Scorpio. And then there were martyrs for the cause. And then throughout the whole period, Christian period, the Pisces period, periodic fanatics, which I kind of equate to these Neptunian storms. Now, the two fishes of Pisces is going to show up quite a few different times in dualities and splits. For instance, the Catholics versus the other denominations in the early formation under the Roman Republic, and then later on against the Protestants and the Catholics. So here we had that division, that duality, the two fishes swimming in opposite directions. And I've found that so many times, so many places there. Then, of course, Rome split itself, into the East and West, the Constantinople and then Rome as two different capitals at one point. But Buddhism, at the same time, goes into China. Buddhism first entered China during the Han Dynasty around the 1st century, primarily through trade routes known as the Silk Road. It was introduced by missionaries and traders from India and Central Asia, leading to the establishment of Buddhist communities and the translation of texts into Chinese. So basically, Buddhism was spreading in China around the same time as Christianity in the Middle East and Europe. Let's not forget the Americas and the Mesoamericans. The Aztec and Mayan cultures during this time inhabited what is now Mexico, the Temple of Teotihuacan, also called the Temple of the Sun. And they were very interested in astrology and following, especially the pattern of Venus, the morning star, and the evening star. And that particular temple complex was built between 150 and 300 AD. They paid, of course, very much to the equinox and solstice times and very interested in sacrifice, star lore, very Pisces, Scorpio there in the Americas. But in general, the Pisces with the Cancer decade. Now we finished with the Scorpio, now another 720 years of the Cancer decade. Very interesting. From basically 340, and remember that number, 340 to 1061, 720 years. Still, the whole era is Pisces, but now I'm looking for Cancerian energies during that 700 years. The solidification of conservative religions, tribal and clan roots, feudalism, of course, very famous for that time, nobles and serfs. Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And it was therefore the mother church with Mother Mary and the miracle of the virgin birth and the cult of the Virgin Mary. Right there in the 4th century was the rise of cloisters, monks, monasteries, convents, hermits, which I think of when you think of those monasteries, little kind of crab conclaves with their herb gardens, teas, preparations, medicinals, and so forth. That does remind me of that Pisces Virgo. But then all the while, the Catholic consolidation, and Catholic means universal, meaning like we will be one big family, eliminating heresy from time to time. And I always found it very interesting that the word heresy or heretic is the ability to choose. Okay, again, the growing Catholic Universal Church and Christianity became the official religion of the empire in 392 by Emperor Theodosius I. The Roman Empire will split permanently not too long after, and that famous, split again with the two fishes and the Eastern, or sometimes called the Byzantine Empire, over there with Constantinople uh, uh, as its head or its point, lasted until 1452. But basically, they were very diminished after 1071, and you can recognize that 1071 is pretty much the end of the Cancer phase. And, the Western Roman Empire fell during the Cancer phase also. And they're staying after that close to home and suspect of foreign ideas. I find this very interesting. It's almost like right on cue. The early church fathers, the monks and their retreats, discipline. Monasteries are great symbols of Cancerian conclaves, as well as Piscean contemplative retreats, where it's quite famous, where wine and beer were cultivated. And here's a few different examples of the early monks who started their own monasteries and brotherhoods. Here is from St. Augustine: the Christian city of God is not of this world, which is so Pisces. He had this really interesting quote in his City of God. Uh, my conclusion from all this is that we are right in believing that when astrologers hit, as they often do, on some correct predictions, this is not the conclusion from some non-existent science of horoscope observation, but is done by the promptings of evil spirits, whose business it is to persuade men and to keep them persuaded of the false and dangerous opinion that men's destinies are settled by the stars. Meanwhile, still in this Cancer decanate, Buddhism expanding into Asia, and I think of Buddha and Pisces Virgo quite nicely, even though Buddha was born in the Aries era, but the expansion went on into the Chan Buddhism, which is meditation Buddhism that went from India slowly through into China. Found a good home over there. And then Zen. Zen grew from this. Zen Buddhism originated in China during the Tang Dynasty as a unique and meditative school of Mahayana Buddhism. And it was inspired a wonderful synthesis of diverse philosophical and spiritual traditions, also from Taoism, Confucianism, and Chinese poetry. Zen is a wonderful thing. I studied it for a while and have great respect for it. Notice, by the way, that the Tang Dynasty was an imperial dynasty of China from 618 to 907. And that was considered in the Chinese civilization a golden age of cosmopolitan culture. I point that out and keep that in mind for the next slide as we continue to take a look at what's happening in the Middle East. The rise of Islam. 622 was when Muhammad made his group move to Medina, and that is when their official calendar begins. That particular year, 622, our Western calendar. And then you have to ask, because they were really a minority there in the Arabian Peninsula, surrounded by huge and very old, very well-oiled mechanisms of empires. And how did they do it? How could they take in just a short amount of time that such a huge empire? Could it be Allah? What's also famous very quickly after they had established themselves that the Muslim culture was that of their own Renaissance. Astrology, mathematics, music, poetry, reading and translating Greek texts into Persia, into Arabia, and in Baghdad as well as in Persia. They had wonderful cultures, great libraries. Paper was introduced from China, which helped them to create books. Again, that was not really happening in Europe, which was in officially the Dark Ages at that point. So quite a fascinating dynamic, and it had that parallel with the Tang Dynasty happening at the same time. But look at this particular chart, how interesting this is. Again, set here for the summer solstice, 622, their year zero. And what a fascinating chart this is. Look at the very bottom. Uranus, Mars, Neptune, Moon conjunction right there on that summer solstice, all in Virgo, opposite Jupiter in Pisces. And remember, this is, of course, the Pisces age with the moon in that decanate right there of Cancer. And not only that, but the other two outer planets, Pluto, they're in Aries squaring Saturn in Cancer at that same time. And if you think about, well, you know, these tribal desert peoples in a short amount of time took over and totally upended many of the cultures at the time. Well, you can see from this chart that they had a lot of air behind their sails. In the meantime, they too, Islam split into the Sunnis and the Shiites. Again, two branches following their blood family ties. One other interesting thing about many flags that one sees connected to Muslim countries, these are just a couple of examples. The moon and the star. Well, that is the moon and Jupiter. And the moon, of course, from the Cancerian thing, and Jupiter is the old ruler of Pisces. So the Pisces age in the Cancer decanate, and it shows up in so many Muslim flags. But then just all of the different things that Muslims just keep busy with their rituals, their routines, call to prayers, I think 5 times a day, bowing towards Mecca, ablutions, cleaning themselves, their hands, pilgrimages. I mean, I think we got Virgo involved with this Piscean inspiration. You can't see the top line, but it says 1061 to 1781, and that is the Pisces decanate, or double Pisces, the third decanate. And 1061, it starts. And almost immediately, around that same time, within a couple of decades, it has begun a new phase, the Pisces, double Pisces energy. And yet another split in 1054, the Great Schism, dividing the Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox churches. The two fishes again, and they are still split today. And then the geopolitical divide among the Roman Empire, centered in Italy, which shriveled in the Cancer decanate, and then the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople. During that time, the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, chivalry and a code of honor, troubadours, poetry, poets in the various courts. And then we have the fantastic Saint Francis of Assisi. a simple faith and pure. Double Pisces age. Here's something, again, the Pisces decade just by the year calculation, 1061, and this is 1066. 5 years later, the Battle of Hastings was fought. And that was led by William the Bastard, a name that's not really known so well, but that was what he was called in Normandy. He was Duke of Normandy. And then he, again, fought the King of England and won. Interestingly enough, Halley's Comet appeared in the sky that year, and the English took it as a bad omen, and the Normans thought it meant victory. And of course, they were right. And here's just me as an aside. I find it odd that the British and thus the English astrologers date the beginning of Britain with a foreign invasion. But that's also a sign too, because it says something about their people will do around the world for the next centuries. A naval power exploring the seas, expanding and invading worldwide. But it was right there, 1066 in Halley's Comet. But again, at the very beginning here, the Crusades began for 2 centuries. And the Pope said, let's take back the Holy Lands. And then brought in the Templars versus the infidels, the famous assassins, which was a fanatical group of Muslims. Assassin, I think it's pronounced in their language, and assassins and hashish is evidently used by those people there. But again, Pisces, drugs, religions, groups, holy crests. It's all just so perfect for that time. That top first line you can't see. Pisces age, Pisces decade, Neptune, water, Jupiter ruled, and a new world was discovered. Even though, of course, those here in the Americas would have to debate that point from the Western perspective. There were now 2 worlds, the old world and the new world, and how perfect that is for a double Pisces dynamic. In the meantime, those troubadours were also establishing morality plays and harking back to King Arthur and his round table and the court, romantically thinking about the Cancerian times of the 6th century. It was also a time of magic and miracles and music fests, music becoming ever more focused in that double Pisces dynamic, and the building of great cathedrals and mosques in the West and Hindu and Muslim temples in the East. For instance, Angkor Wat in Cambodia was built between 1113 and 1150 AD. Meanwhile, the Cologne Cathedral, one of the largest churches in the world for many, many years, it was began in 1248, and it took them 630 years to complete. What an effort. But again, something that the Virgo Pisces would not be afraid of doing. That last line you can't see, it says basically the double Pisces inspiration built high and up, high to the skies. Inspiration Pisces. Here's something very interesting, all in Europe. When the European universities were founded, again, thinking double Pisces, Virgo polarity, and scholarship, studies, wanting to learn, wanting to understand. Here, I'm not sure if you can see them in some of these different dates, but I can mention a couple of them. Cambridge, 1209. Turin, 1405, Salamanca, 1227, Naples, 1224, Rome, 1303, etc. I mean, many universities just sprang. It was, the dark ages were over and it was a time of learning. But there's something else going on here. an academic aside, because we also have the astrological great mutations, namely Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions, and they align in elements for periods that last 200 years, and then they go from fire to earth to air to water. And they were in the air element from 1186 to 1405, right when all of those universities were founded. It's really quite perfect. Again, it's just an added dynamic here connected to the great mutations. And here we are right now because we are in another air phase, which was really solidified in 2021. There is an overlap uh, with that, as you probably know. But it's going to be for the next 200 years. Hello, Brave New World, quantum computers, and artificial intelligence. That is just starting up, paralleling in the Aquarian age what the great mutation in air signs did in the Pisces age. Lots of food for thought right there. However, there's always the other fish swimming in the opposite direction. And we had Genghis Khan. He was founder of the first Khan of the Mongol Empire. Again, as the Crusaders were invading the Holy Land, the Mongol hordes were going all over, creating a huge empire. He was so brutal. He and his armies killed millions. And this was basically one of the downfalls of the Islamic Golden Age. Their culture really was hit hard by the Mongol hordes. Not that long after that, still in the double Pisces Virgo polarity, we had the Black Death there in Europe. It was huge. 50 million people probably perished, maybe 50% of the population, and very much into superstitions. Why did that happen? Must be angry. Maybe the end of the world. Oh, how about the pogroms? Will then get rid of some Jews. I mean, all kinds of chaos and craziness going on in that way. In the meantime, still during this Pisces time, in the New World, from the 1500s to the 1700s, perhaps 80% those natives died, mostly via diseases also. And I think of the Virgo mixing Pisces liquid solutions and contaminants. We're getting now closer and closer to the end of Pisces, and the fishes are swimming hard. The Renaissance. The Muslims kept the fires burning for a long time in their cultures, and then they had a very vibrant culture in Iberia, in modern Spain, and they were there for, I believe, like 700 years. And so they kept the Moorish Spain with culture, astrology, libraries, uh, all kinds of wonderful things that then the Europeans started to absorb. And that was then the origin of the Renaissance. And then we had the rediscovery of the classics, astrology, medicines, spices, humanities, and humanism, the slow rise of modern nations, the reintroduction of money, trade, commerce on a grand scale, banking, with, by the way, a little help from the Neptune-Pluto conjunction that just went into Gemini in 1398. And I must note that Gutenberg, of the famous printing press, was born around 1400, the early Renaissance. Here, by the way, a really great Padua baptistery, the Pisces timeline from the 14th century, a great image that we're talking about right now. And here is Jesus rising above Pisces over there. And you can see that there were the inspirations from the angels from the Aries time over there on the left. And Jesus pointing towards Aquarius, giving us today in the Aquarian age blessings now. We're getting closer and closer, and I'm thinking of the last couple of degrees now of the Pisces age. And here we have the Baroque era, dualism showing itself again, even more so in architecture, dual columns or pilasters, representing also the church and state powers. Meanwhile, the Protestants had their ideal of unadorned and simple churches and cathedrals, while the Catholics went the opposite direction. Ostentation, show, those little naked putis, those little baby angels around there in their glory. Music goes into a binary form, two parts. And then society and politics. We can point out that René Descartes aids the separation between the church and the state in the 1670s. We're getting, again, just a few degrees closer to the end of Pisces. And that's when many thinkers begin questioning old political structures. And then we had the worldly philosophers contemplating social justice, contracts, new societies. And then we have the Enlightenment, Pisces slowing down, it on one level kind of cooling off, but I think it's also the inspiration that's going to kickstart the next age in Aquarius. And we have gentlemen's science clubs, the Masons fighting. They're learning God, the divine architect, and we mortals must use our minds, marked by two main events representative of the new age of reason. And the sun is the center of our cosmos. Right there, Isaac Newton's Principia, published in 1687, and then the English Glorious Revolution in 1688. But I also think that one of the last great innovations, a transition technology of the Piscean age, was by James Watt, who developed the steam engine, steam, hot water, and its power. This was the transition from the Pisces age to the Aquarian age. And now we're at that very last degree of Pisces. 72 years. In England, there was an encouragement of individual patents to spread the knowledge of techniques and inventions for the burgeoning industrial age, which was underway, innovations. And I think indeed the industrial age and the Aquarian age just fits in so perfectly. In France, again, that last degree, those last 72 years, there appeared in France the Encyclopedia. And that was a collection of knowledge of how to do things. Up to then, most knowledge, skills, and crafts were part of a secretive or private tradition of apprenticeship or skilled practitioners and masters. Virgo energy, for sure, craftspeople, but that Cancerian decanate from the family enterprises from ages past. Thus, these new centers of industry were rapidly replacing craftsmen and small shops. Production is revving up. So the Industrial Revolution demanded larger machines and factories. Pre-Aquarian groupings mixed with designs and innovations. Quickly, the organizing power of these new endeavors were in the hands of the new industrial capitalists, and nations were toying with the rights of citizens, but not so fast with that. And here we are. Look, Mummy, astrological glyphs of the planets. Don't look, Jimmy. I don't want you to be influenced by, oh God, no, Jimmy. It's too late, Mother. I understand everything. The great ages And in this Aquarian age, of course, we've got that polarity to Leo. And so the rise of very strong personalities, actors, shows, heroes, superheroes, very Leo sort of things that's technologically expressed in our movie theaters and techno devices.
Or more.
Very good. I did some more math. And so I looked back even further. Okay. And you can play with these numbers on your own because as we go back into the Leo age, 11,179 BC to 9,018 BC, the Leo age with the Aquarius polarity, the opposite of what we have right now, the Aquarian age. And then I immediately think of Atlantis. But again, that's all theoretical. I really don't know. In fact, a lot of, this time is pretty much prehistory. It was the time of great myths and legends. But think about, again, the Leo age. What I did find interesting is that the Holocene age, which is what we call our present age today, started approximately 11,700 years ago, and it is our modern time, once the Earth warmed. It was a great glacial period, the Great Ice Age before that, and then it, of course, shifted and changed and warmed up with our present Holocene age. And that would take us then to 9675 BC approximately. For the last 600 years, almost a decade of 720 years, or the Leo decade of Leo, or a double fixed fire in that age. And that was when the world warmed up. How interesting that is. Then after that, the Cancer age, again, pretty much prehistory, 9,000 to about 7,000 BC. Capricorn polarity there, relatively few records, but agriculture, herbs, medicinals, it makes sense. But it's kind of theoretical. And I'm kind of wondering, the great goddesses, the matriarchies, tribes grouping into larger social orders. It's a no-brainer to think, oh yeah, the Cancerian domestication of animals, living in clans, villages, the rise of groups and social groups. And could this be like the magical, nostalgic time that every now and then different cultures think back fondly of? Again, still prehistory, but the Gemini age, 6860 to 4700 BC, with that Sagittarius polarity. I'm thinking writing, communicating stories, legends, again, but it's kind of theoretical still. I can also think about the wheel, travel, bartering, commerce, trade, certainly fits in nicely into the Gemini age. I believe, but I don't know, do the Egyptian hieroglyphs go back that far? I think they do, but I'm not sure. But I could probably make a pretty good educated guess that there were lots of myths and legends and stories set to music and lyres. But now, once we get into the Taurus age, now we're on solid ground. We have got some information about the Taurus age going that back. And here is this really interesting chronological history there showing the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. And during the Taurus phase, we've got the Bronze Age, which fits in nicely with Taurus. And it part of the latter part of the Bronze Age, and then definitely the all of the Iron Age, is the Aries. And of course, that's so perfect for Aries and iron. So the Taurian age, agriculture, the plow, led by ox and cattle, cultivating the land, grains, cooking, bread and beer. the famous cultures of Sumeria, Mesopotamia, and they wrote in cuneiform to record exchanges, products, lands, and agreements. And they had those cuneiform on those small tablets of clay in which they baked them, and they are preserved even today. Taurus, calculations, observations, astronomy, and astrology, recognizing that in the Taurus age is the Scorpio polarity. Law codes, justice and order, rules. Again, more trade, commerce, money, metals. Taurus, earth, and metals dug from the earth and smelted and molded, which is again rather Scorpio, and that continued interest in cosmology there too. The rise of education, religion, math, planetary cycles, observations, rituals, prayers, all during the age of Taurus. In Egypt, I find that very interesting dynamic because that Egypt polarity Scorpio is really quite suspicious over there. Their interest in the dead and the book of the dead and tombs and mummies. I mean, I'm wondering if they got obsessed with that, and it is fixed earth with fixed water polarity there. Interestingly enough, the Giza pyramid has a visual shaft from the center of the pyramid that would have directly aligned with Orion's belt in 2700 BC. And Orion was associated with Osiris. I had mentioned Osiris before, which was a god that was torn up and resurrected, a solar deity of the Egyptians. But indeed, they had that preoccupation with death and rebirth and an intricate afterlife, all rather scorpionic. My sense is that maybe it was in a previous age, maybe in like the Gemini age, they got really clear about travels to what happens after death. But then it got into a bit of the stunted, taking things a little bit too literally. And so, yes, there is an afterlife. And so we have to protect the humans inside these mummies. And so I think that they got rigid and superstitious. We can definitely see Taurus shining with the Minoan culture of Crete. Art and artistry, women bare-chested and guiding culture, music, aesthetics, and then, of course, the famed Minoan bull and the Minotaur, and the acrobats bouncing off the charging bulls. And that is still today in the Spanish and Portuguese bull contests to be seen. In the meantime, up north in England, Stonehenge during the Taurus Age, this big monolithic, what is it? Is it a solstice equinox calculator? Definitely a place of gatherings and rituals, but it's really quite classic there, whether that be Taurus or Scorpio for Stonehenge. Then we go into Aries, the Aries age from 2539 to the 379 that we have visited earlier. Again, I subdivide that into the decanates, 10 degrees each. The first decanate of Aries, the Sagittarius, 2539 to 1819 BC. Then the Leo age, 1819 to 1099. And then the last is the Aries decanate from 1099 to 379. The age of Aries, very evident in the customs, stories, and legends of ancient Greece. Jason and the Golden Fleece, the adventures of Odysseus, Hercules and Perseus, the Trojan Wars, and its heroes are all obvious in their symbology. The Greek city-states, with their festivals, rational debate, politics, rugged independence, curiosity, speculation, sports events, and theater competitions seem very Aries. Over in Persepolis, Iran, in Persia, again, a very ancient culture and traditions, same time. And then the Aryan, which is, I think, a very interesting name, the Aryan invasions of India and Persia, they occurred during the Aries Age from about 2000 to 1000 BC for a long period of time. And they conquered the Indian subcontinent by 1700 BC, displacing the Dravidian peoples. I find this very interesting here. And they were an agricultural society and worshipped fertility symbols, especially the bull, sometimes associated with Shiva. And the Dravidians' chief god was Varuna, who ruled cosmic law, order, and magic. And these darker skinned peoples were obviously thriving during the age of Taurus. Meanwhile, the Aryans were more light-skinned, hard-drinking people, predominantly warriors and roamers. They used horses, chariots, and swords. Their god Indra, uh, which is connected to fire, by the way, eventually forced the old Dravidian god Varuna out of the chief position. Indra was the warrior god, adventurous and impulsive, wielding thunderbolts and having a short temper. Mars and Jupiter were fire sign rulers. His parents, um, by the way, who he superseded, were associated with a bull and a cow. So classic. Meanwhile, during the Aries Age, and this is now the Aries Leo phase, the god of the Jews developed during this Aries Leo phase, and it's well known as a wrathful and jealous god. The sacrificing of rams and sheep was a common practice. Moses was indignant when the wayward Jews, lost in the desert and hungry for the good old days, cast a golden calf, Taurus, and worshiped it. Moses told them that there was a new covenant, new rules for this time, Aries. Solomon, the wise, ruled in the Leo decanate of Aries, by the way. And the Jews consider themselves the chosen people, which does sound Leo. Notice that Leo and Taurus, fixed signs, are significant in Jewish states. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi is a Babylonian legal text composed again in this Aries age. And the famous code of law was aligned with Shamash, the Babylonian sun god and the god of justice. But his was a pretty harsh justice. This was the classic an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth sort of thing. But again, the legal system there, the polarity of Aries, by the way, is Libra. And so writing and justice and rules and so forth. Here, another thing from Persepolis, Iran, the fire sign Leo lion is taking out the Taurus age. That's my interpretation. Then there was this famous 12th century late Bronze Age collapse. Many scholars, historians talk about this. The late Bronze Age collapse was a period of societal meltdown in the Mediterranean basin during the 12th century BC. It's the whole area, I mean, from Greece to Egypt and the Aegean, the Eastern Libya, the collapse, they say, was sudden, violent, and culturally disruptive for many Bronze Age civilizations, creating a sharp material decline for the region's previously existing powers. And then the Iron Age began around 1300 BC. Iron, of course, is associated with Mars, and this is now a double Aries influence. Meanwhile, In India, they had also an Iron Age that was working with iron, working painted gray ware culture. And that was also dating from 1200 BC to the reign of Ashoka in the 3rd century BC. Here is a really interesting chart, I think, of that late Bronze Age collapse. And I found this here for 1205 BC. And looking down there in the 3rd house, here we have that famous Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Cancer. And boy, that Saturn-Neptune, there's always some, upheavals happen whenever they two get together. But my friends, that is not all. They make a nice trine up to Jupiter in Pisces, then a crossover here to Uranus and Pluto in Scorpio, and then back down to Cancer. But what do we have over there in the 7th house but a Uranus-Pluto conjunction during that collapse? So we have the double whammo of Uranus-Pluto, cultural shifts and changes, and then the typhoons, reactions of Saturn-Neptune. Fascinating time. Then we jump into a high point, and now we're talking about kind of like the last degrees of Aries before we go into the Pisces age. And very similar to how the last degrees of Pisces into the Aquarian age, when we had all of these really geniuses coming up and these great people showing up and innovations and so forth, preparing us for the Aquarian age, the same thing can be found here, but specifically in the divine 6th century. And I took many philosophy classes in college, and many a philosophy instructor said, we don't know why, but in the 6th century, it was pretty amazing because suddenly all of these great teachers were born in a short period of time. Not only sages and philosophers, but also world leaders like Cyrus the Great of the Persian Empire. But here is Zoroaster, born in Persia, who started Zoroastrianism. Gautama the Buddha, meantime, same time in India. Mahavira founds Jainism, also in India. Lao Tzu, born around the same time, founds Taoism, and he doesn't care, by the way. Then we have Confucius, again, born around the same time, Confucianism, which flourishes in China. Meanwhile, in Greece, here we have the pre-Socratics and Pythagoras, Heraclitus, Thales, Empedocles. I mean, great wisdom. It sparked so much all right there in that 6th century BC. And here is a chart for that time. This is so amazing. Look at that lineup, all of the outer planets connected here at the very top. Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, all in Taurus, all right there at that particular time in 577 BC, within 2 degrees of each other. Wow, really, imagine if you were to take the 1960s and the 1990s and you put them together. That's what you got right there. But opposite, directly opposite of that is Saturn in Scorpio. And then squaring all of them over there in Aquarius is Jupiter. I mean, what a fabulous chart. And will that ever happen again? I don't know. But it happened in the 6th century, and that was a Renaissance spark of inspiration and global beliefs, philosophers, leaders around the world. And that's what I got to say about the whole thing.
Um, That was great. Thank you. Really, really interesting. Basic premise.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And really, there's so many things that one can say even about this Aquarian age that we find ourselves in. And it's again, fixed air with the polarity of Leo, I've already mentioned, but then this decanate is the Libra decanate. And so rules and constitutions and ideals, and I mentioned, the French Revolution and their rallying cries, and the rise also of the power and the roles of women in this Libra decanate, and this very fair-minded Aquarian age. And of course, again, with all of the techno gadgets that we have, I mean, I can't imagine anyone saying that it's still the Pisces age. It seems like so obvious to me.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you tremendously. It's really fascinating. 4 minutes. 4 minutes.
Very good. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Could you put your contact info back up on the screen, please?
I can do that. Yeah.
Okay, great. And all that research was just phenomenal.
I must admit, I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, that's fair.
Just for the knowledge of world history.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah. So, yeah, I got into astrology when I had Uranus transit my sun in Scorpio. And within 2 weeks, I was touched by the inspiration.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And you probably haven't come out of that rabbit hole yet.
Never, no, I'm infected.
All right, very good, very good. Thank you so much. And I'll be in touch to get some more of your contact information, mailing address and things like that.
Very good. Yes, and I'll look forward to also getting a copy of the talk too. I have a busy YouTube channel with lots of other talks that I have done, and I've given actually 3 talks on the Saturn-Neptune alignment because, of course, it's like so happening right here, right now.
Right. Yeah. Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Very good, good. Well, take care, eyes to the skies and all that.
Okay, God bless.
Okay,
Happy Turkey Day. Thank
all
you so
right.
much.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.